I'm going to focus tonight on scripts. So I will start by showing you a sheet of a Torah, which I do happen to have in my closet. If you look closely, you can see that this section is actually thematic to the evening. Can anyone tell what it is? Can you put that in the chat? Yeah, someone got it. A few people got it. It's the 10 Commandments. And in fact, you don't even really need to read the words. You can kind of see if you're familiar with how it's spaced. Each one is kind of has its own, the spacing is such that don't kill, don't steal, and it has a lot of white space. So my focus tonight is on scripts, as I said. This Torah and all Torahs are written in a script called ashurit. And a bit later, we're going to come back to that word and talk about what it means. There are many styles of ashurit. So broadly speaking, there is Ashkenazi style and there is Sephardi style. So Eastern European and then coming from Spain and North Africa. But within those, there are many, many, many styles from different locations and different time periods. But all of them fall under this one script called ashurit. Was this always the script used for the Hebrew language? It was not. Just a distinction to clarify, script being different from language, right? So we could write a certain language in any script, really. It might not be the most appropriate script to use for a particular language. Say, for example, if that script didn't have a sound that language has. But the same way we transliterate Hebrew into the Roman alphabet, the Hebrew could be written in a number of different alphabets. So the earliest Hebrew alphabet is called Proto-Sinaitic or Proto-Canaanite. And we're talking about 3,500 years ago, so about 1500 BCE. And it is one of the earliest alphabets. Some people think it's actually the earliest alphabet of all alphabets. It's not the earliest writing system, right? Writing systems were much earlier, but alphabets, which alphabets use an abstract shape to represent a discrete sound, and then we use these symbols to form words and sentences, and that indeed was a revelation. So let's start with the advent of the alphabet, from before the advent of the alphabet, when a symbol didn't represent a sound, but a picture represented an object. So if some of you were paying close attention when I had the cheesecake sign up, at a certain point you might have seen this other thing, because actually it's on the same slide. So you may have gotten a preview. Okay, so I'm going to take you through this. The first stage of written language is the pictographic stage. So here we have the picture of a house, and that means house. A picture of a loaf of bread, and that means loaf of bread. Picture of a mouth, that means mouth. Pretty basic. Stage 2. Now we start combining the pictographs, right? So we don't need as many signs. We don't need unique symbols for every single object or every single concept. So we combine a picture of a mouth and a picture of bread, and what might this be? You can think it or put it in the chat. And Yes, great. So eating. I mean, that we could probably come up with another idea, but I think that makes the most sense. That's what I thought of when I, made this thing up. Of course, these pictures are a little anachronistic to when writing first started. But stage 3 is where it really gets interesting, where a level of abstraction happens. So the first picture is of a car, and the second picture is of a dog or a pet. So what is this combination of a car and a pet? Well, at this point, and maybe there are some guesses, you can put in the chat. Yes, someone got it. Okay, all right, someone says a road trip, right? That makes sense. But remember that at this stage of a phoneme, a phonogram, we've gone to abstraction. So the symbol no longer represents the object, but it simply represents the sound. So a car plus a pet is carpet, right? So again, very anachronistic, both the car and the idea of the carpet, and frankly, the idea of a pet. None of it matches, 3,500 years ago, but to get the idea across. So I want to show you some examples of the early Hebrew and how that fits in. So I'm holding up to my screen very early Aleph, okay? What does this look like to you? Yeah, it's an ox, right? And initially, it meant ox. The word Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, it didn't represent a sound, it represented an actual ox. Now, in the development, the ox begins to abstract some, right? And now you can still kind of tell it looks like an ox, or it looked like that first ox, but it's a little more abstract and harder to tell. And at this stage, this is actually what's called Phoenician. That might sound familiar to some of you. We're talking about 3,000 years ago, so 1000 BCE. And Phoenician is very, very similar to early Hebrew, almost indistinguishable. And just as a fun side note, the Greeks borrowed the Phoenician alphabet for their language. And instead of writing from right to left, they wrote from left to right. And so some of the letters rotated. So if I rotate this letter, what do you see now? It's an A, right? So the Latin alphabet or Roman alphabet comes from originally the Hebrew alphabet. Another example. This is very early Hebrew, what's called the Proto-Sinaitic or Proto-Canaanite. And what does this symbol look like to you? Yeah, river, good. Mountains, it does look like mountains. It's not mountains, it's more like the river, it's water. This is the letter Mem. But initially it represented water. And how do you say water in Hebrew? Mayim. And you can still hear the word mayim in the name for the letter Mem. I'll do one more example. This is a Proto-Sinaitic ayin. And what's it look like? An eye. Good, it's an eye. So it used to represent an eye, and then it began to abstract, and it just represented a sound, like a guttural sound. And in fact, the name for this letter, ayin, means eye. It still means eye in modern Hebrew, ayin. This, by the way, is the Phoenician ayin, so it starts to abstract a little bit, and it still kind of looks like an eye, but it's more rounded, right? More kind of like you wouldn't necessarily think of this as an I. Okay, are there any questions up to this point? You could put them in the box. No? Okay. Where does our script come in? What about the Hebrew that we're familiar with? What about the block Hebrew, the Torah script? How did that happen? So what we call Hebrew script is actually an Aramaic script called ashurit. And about in the 8th century BCE, so slightly after Phoenician, the Aramaic script started to distinguish itself from Phoenician. Now, these things didn't happen like suddenly. It wasn't like, oh, suddenly we created an ashurit script or an Aramaic script. It's that the script started to change in different locations, and then it became distinguished enough that later scholars said, okay, we're going to call this by a different name. It's a different script. So that was an Aramaic script. And then Aramaic really spread big because it was used in the Babylonian Empire, and then following that in the Persian Empire. And Jews adopted this script, this Aramaic script, in exile and brought it back with them to Israel. It does stem from the original Hebrew, but it's not a direct line. There were branches on the trees, and then one branch went over here, and one branch went over here, and then the Jews adopted the branch, not the Hebrew branch, but the Aramaic branch, and used it for Torahs. So my question for us is, if we didn't start using this script until after the Babylonian exile, after Revelation, after Mount Sinai, what was written on the tablets? What were those letters? What did the 10 Commandments look like, right? We have this image in our heads of the 10 Commandments and, with the Hebrew letters on them. But so let's look at what some of the sources tell us. Okay, this is just a recap, right? We have our ox in the Proto-Sinaitic, the really early, and then the Phoenician, and then the Latin just for fun. And you can see the development. So mem, meaning water or mayim, ayin, meaning eye. And now we have some interesting texts. Okay, so the first text is from Exodus or Shemot, and this is about the tablets. Vayifen vayered Moshe minahar ushne luchot ha'edut biyado. Luchot ktuvim mishne avrehem mizeh umizeh em ktuvim. And Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of testimony in his hand. Tablets that were written on both sides. On the one side and on the other side were they written. והלוחות מעשה אלוהים המה והמכתב אלוהים הוא חרוט על הלוחות. And the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. Okay, we're going to come back to that, but I want to read the next 2 lines and then I'll stop the screen share. So there's a section in the Babylonian Talmud in Megillah. Rav Chizda said, the mem and the samech, which were in the tablets, stood there by a miracle. Okay, we'll come back to it to understand it. The Jerusalem Talmud Megillah says the ayin stood there by a miracle. Okay, so what's going on here? I made the 10 Commandments. Okay, these are the tablets. So when they say that they were written on this side and on this side, on both sides were they written. What could that mean? That could mean a number of things, right? So one possibility, which I drew here, is The 10 Commandments are just represented by numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down the one side, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 down the other. And then if you turn them around, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, same thing. So each side has in fact all 10, right? That's one possibility. What's another possibility? That they're written on both sides. Ideas? I know it's late. Well, remember from the second verse that they were carved, right? 5 on one and 5 on the other, right? So it could have, like, one idea is it could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then on the other one side 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then on this one 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the other side 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Great. All 10 on one and all 10 on the other. Also totally possible. Other ideas? I'm going to raise one more possibility. If it was chiseled, let's say it was chiseled all the way through. Yeah, exactly. From IHC. I don't know what your name is, but your screen says IHC. Exactly, carved all the way through, so that actually it was showing on both sides it was carved. So that, I believe, is what the rabbis had in mind when they said the samech was floating as if by a miracle. The samech and the mem was floating by a miracle. What do they mean? Samech and the mem were floating as if by a miracle. Who remembers those letter stencils, those like plastic stencil things that had the letters cut out, right? And you could like easily draw the letters. What did the O look like there? If you remember very specifically, what would happen to a stencil if it was just the O? The middle would fall out, right? Yeah, little donut holes floating. They were floating because they had these little attachments, right? The O was attached to the rest of the thing. Otherwise, the whole thing would fall out. So this, I believe, is what the rabbis mean by the mem and the samech were floating as if by a miracle. So we have here, here's the letter samech. This is the samech that we're more familiar with. It's like an O, right? And if it was carved through the tablets, it would totally fall out and it wouldn't look like a samech anymore. So they said, oh, the samech, the Babylonian Talmud said the samech was floating as if by a miracle. What about the mem? Is the mem round? Kinda? I have a feeling they were talking about the final mem, right? Another closed letter. So the samech and the final mem, as if floating as if by a miracle. What about the ayin? Remember, the Jerusalem Talmud had a different version. They said the ayin was floating as if by a miracle. What's going on here? Yeah, exactly. It's what this person is saying. It was the old school ayin, the older ayin, right? Remember what the older ayin looked like? Oops. Right? These are the older ayins. They look like eyes, they're circles, and those are the ayins that would be falling out. Questions. I saw that there are a few questions in the box. Exodus 32:15, the tablets were in his hand, singular. What do you make of this? His hand, meaning I think Moshe's hand. I think that's what you're asking, but I'm not totally sure. If I didn't answer your question, please clarify. That was from Lamont. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again because this is a problem, right? What script was it? If Hebrew is the holy script, right, given to Moses by God, but what if that script didn't actually exist? at the time that the tablets were given. How does that change how we feel about it? What does that mean? What does that mean in terms of our Hebrew and our Hebrew script and what it and what it means? So let's look at how the rabbis deal with this. Okay. This is a little bit long, but I think it will be worth it. Okay. So we have a few ideas in the Talmud for how to deal with this. The three paragraphs are three different ideas. So Mar Zutra, or some say Mar Ukba, said, originally the Torah was given to Israel in Hebrew characters and in the sacred Hebrew language. Now, when he says Hebrew characters, he means that early Hebrew, right? Because the later script is called ashurit. Later, in the times of Ezra, right? So this is in exile, the Torah was given in ashurit script and ashurit language. So he's saying the Torah, not only was it written in a different script in ashurit, it also was in a whole other language. It was like a translation. Finally, they selected for Israel the ashurit script and Hebrew language, right? And that's what we have now. We have the Torah is in Hebrew language, but ashurit script. And he says, why is the script called ashurit? Because it ascended with the Jewish people from Ashur when they returned from their exile in Babylonia. Ashur is the name of a location in Babylonia. And that, he's saying, is why it's called ashurit, which makes sense. Rebbe has another idea, different idea. The Torah was originally given to Israel in ashurit writing. This is a pretty bold claim because, as we've seen just from the evolution of scripts, it doesn't seem that ashurit existed at this time. But Rebbe's going to explain that away. The Torah was originally given to Israel in ashurit writing. When they sinned with the calf, probably, it was changed into roaz, meaning broken or chiseled script. That's the original Hebrew. But when they repented, the Assyrian characters were reintroduced. Okay, so he's saying, no, the ashurit existed all along. It was there right at the beginning for a moment, and then God took it away and only gave it back many generations later. So how does he explain that it's called ashurit? Because from Ashur in Babylonia, he says, why was it named ashurit? Because its script was meushar, meaning upright. He says, no, Ashur has nothing to do with it. It's just because the letters, the script is square and upright, and that's why it's called ashurit. Another idea. Oops, what happened? Rabbi Shimon ben Eliezer said in the name of Eliezer ben Parta, who spoke in the name of Elazar of Modin, the writing was never changed, for it is written, the vavs, or hooks, of the pillars. He's saying, it's always been the same. There was never anything else but what we have now. The vavs, the hooks of the pillars. So he's referring to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, had these hooks, right? And the way you say hook in Hebrew is vav, which is also a letter in the Hebrew alphabet. As the word pillars did not change, neither did the vavim, neither did the letter vav. As it is written, and unto the Jews according to their writing and their language, as their language had not changed, neither had their writing. So we have different ideas. Some of the rabbis go with a more historical lens, and some of them go with a more mythical lens. But to all of them, it's important to explain why and how the letters we use today for Torah became meaningful to us.